Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And today we're going to be talking about something really, really interesting. We're going to be we're going to be diving deep into this idea of adversarial machine learning, or AML,
Oh, yeah.
and how it's being used to attack intrusion detection systems. So basically, imagine hackers using AI to outsmart the very systems that are designed to protect us. I mean, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's actually a real and growing threat. And our guide for this deep dive is a master's thesis in computer engineering called Adversarial Machine Learning for Generating Attacks on Intrusion Detection Systems by Giuliano Solaro. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand how AML works, the impact it has, and what we can do to protect ourselves.
It's a fascinating topic for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into the AML stuff, let's just back up a little bit, make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly are intrusion detection systems? You know, these IDSs, what do they do and why are they so important?
Well, you can think of an IDS like a burglar alarm for your computer network. You know, it's constantly monitoring for any suspicious activity, like someone trying to break in or steal sensitive information.
Okay, so they're like those digital guard dogs always on the lookout for trouble.
Exactly. And just like guard dogs, IDSs come in different, flavors. Some of them rely on a database of known attack patterns. They're really good at catching those repeat offenders, but they struggle with anything new or unexpected. Then we have the more sophisticated IDSs, the ones that use AI and machine learning. These systems, they learn what normal behavior looks like on the network and flag anything that deviates from that pattern. So they're much better at catching those stealthy, never-seen-before attacks.
Oh, okay, I see. So one's looking for a specific face in the crowd while the other's looking for anyone acting suspiciously, even if they haven't done anything wrong before.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And a lot of these modern, sophisticated IDS are powered by machine learning, which means they analyze huge amounts of data to learn patterns and identify anomalies without relying on someone manually programming all those rules.
Oh, wow. So they're constantly learning and adapting as they go.
Exactly. And they use some pretty powerful machine learning techniques too, like decision trees, where the system kind of follows a series of questions to reach a conclusion, or neural networks, which are like inspired by the way our brains work. These are just a couple of examples, but you can see how these IDS are using some serious brain power to try and catch the bad guys.
That's pretty impressive. It sounds like they've got it all covered, but that's where AML enters the picture, right? If these IDS are using AI to protect us, attackers are figuring out how to use AI to kind of like to outsmart them, to get past them.
Right. AML is all about exploiting the very algorithms that power these sophisticated IDSs.
So instead of just trying to break through the defenses, attackers are now finding ways to manipulate the system itself.
Exactly. And they do this by crafting what we call adversarial examples. These are they're like disguises for malicious activities, careful design to trick the IDS into thinking everything's perfectly normal.
So the IDS sees this like disguised malware and thinks nothing to see here, while the attacker just waltzes right in.
That's the basic idea. But applying AML to cybersecurity it's tricky. It has unique challenges compared to other areas where AML is used, like image recognition, for example. Let's say you change a few pixels in a picture of a cat. It might fool an image recognition system, but to us, it still looks like a cat, right?
Right. A blurry cat is still a cat.
Exactly. But in cybersecurity, if you're tweaking malware, you have to make sure those changes don't actually break the malware. It's like forging a key. It has to look like the original to fool the guard, but it also has to actually turn the lock to get you in.
Oh, okay. So it's not just about creating a disguise. It's got to be a disguise that still works, that still does what it's supposed to do.
Exactly. And then there's the challenge of knowing whether your attack will actually work. In image recognition, you can see if your altered picture still looks like the original. But in cybersecurity, it's harder to know for sure if that tweaked piece of malware will actually behave the way you want it to once it's out there in the wild.
So it's a bit of a gamble then.
In a way, yes. And this uncertainty makes it hard to measure the true impact of AML in cybersecurity. I mean, we know it's a threat, but quantifying its effectiveness is an ongoing area of research.
So how do these AML attacks actually work? I imagine there are, different approaches depending on the attacker's goals and how much they know about the system they're targeting.
You're absolutely right. Let's say we have an attacker trying to break into a network. They might start with a brute force approach where they just keep tweaking the malicious input until they find something that fools the IDS. It's not elegant, but it can be effective.
So it's like trying every key on a giant keyring until you find the one that fits.
Exactly. But if the attacker knows a bit more about the target system, they can get more sophisticated. One technique is to figure out which features of the input are most important to the IDS and then subtly manipulate those to cause misclassification.
So they're finding those pressure points, those parts of the system that are most easily manipulated.
Exactly. And then there are attacks where the attacker doesn't need to know much about the target system at all. This is where things get really interesting and a little scary. They can actually create a kind of digital replica of the IDS and test their attacks on that replica.
Wait a minute, how do they create a replica of the IDS if they don't know how it works?
That's the clever part. They don't need to know the exact inner workings. They just need to find a way to mimic its behavior. It's kind of like training a sparring partner to fight like your opponent, even if you don't know your opponent's every move.
So they can practice their attacks on this replica without ever tipping off the real IDS.
Exactly. And if they can fool the replica, there's a good chance they can fool the real thing too.
This is what we call transferability, and it's one of the most concerning aspects of AML in cybersecurity.
Wow. It sounds like these attackers have a whole arsenal of techniques at their disposal. But surely there must be ways to defend against these AML attacks, right? We can't just let them run wild.
Of course not. The cybersecurity community is constantly developing ways to fight back, to stay ahead of these evolving threats, and that's what we'll be exploring in part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. So in part 1, we learned all about how attackers are using AI to basically sneak these disguised attacks past intrusion detection systems. It's kind of scary to think about, right?
Yeah, it definitely highlights a new kind of vulnerability in these systems that we rely on.
Absolutely. But, I'm curious, what can we do to fight back? What are the defenders doing to counter this whole AML threat? Well, just like attackers are using AI to craft these attacks, defenders are using AI to build stronger defenses. So it's kind of like an AI arms race in a way.
Oh, wow. So they're using the same tools, they're just fighting on different sides.
Exactly. And it's a constantly evolving landscape. But at a high level, there are kind of two main approaches to defending against these AML attacks. One is to try and detect the adversarial examples before they even get to the IDS.
So catch them at the door before they can even try to sneak in?
Yeah, exactly. You can think of it like airport security, right? They have all these different layers of screening to catch anything suspicious. They might scan your bag for prohibited items, but they also observe your behavior, looking for anything unusual.
Right. So these detection methods are looking for those telltale signs that something's not right, even if it doesn't match a specific attack pattern.
Precisely. They might analyze the statistical properties of the incoming data or compare it to known patterns of adversarial examples, kind of like a digital fingerprint analysis.
That makes sense. What if the attackers are really good at disguising their attacks? What if they can make these adversarial examples look perfectly normal?
Well, that's where the second approach comes in, making the IDS itself more resistant to attack. We call this robustness.
Robustness. Okay, and how do we make an IDS more robust?
One way is something called adversarial training.
Adversarial training. What's that?
Well, it's kind of like giving your immune system a little dose of a virus so it can learn to fight it off. We intentionally expose the IDS to adversarial examples during its training. And this helps it to learn to recognize these attacks in the future.
So it's like a boot camp for IDSs, getting them ready for the real world.
Yeah,
Smart.
exactly. And another robustness technique is to make the IDS's decision-making process less vulnerable. So remember how we talked about attackers tweaking those crucial features to cause misclassification? Well, defenders are working on ways to make those features less sensitive to those tiny changes.
So they're like reinforcing those pressure points you were talking about to
Yes.
make them, harder to manipulate.
Exactly. And then there's this really interesting approach where we can use multiple machine learning models working together.
So instead of just one IDS, you have a whole team of them.
That's the idea. It's kind of like having a panel of experts, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, working together to make a decision. If one model is fooled by an adversarial example, the others might be able to catch it.
That sounds like a much more robust approach, for sure. It's like having that checks and balances system to make sure nothing slips through the cracks.
Exactly. And this multi-layered approach is really important in fighting AML. It's not just about detection or robustness alone. It's about combining them to create a more comprehensive, a more powerful defense system.
So it's like building a fortress with all these different layers of protection.
Precisely. And as attackers come up with new tricks, defenders have to keep innovating and adapting to stay ahead. It's that constant cat and mouse game.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of innovation, let's talk about Giuliano Solaro's work. His master's thesis not only highlights the vulnerabilities of current IDS, but also proposes a whole new system for generating those adversarial examples. What can you tell us about that?
Well, one of the things that's really interesting about Solaro's work is that he doesn't just point out the problem. He actually puts forward a solution, a new system that's designed to address some of these challenges we've been discussing.
Okay, now I'm really interested. What are the key features of this new system?
Well, one of the core principles is this idea of maintaining functionality. Remember when we were talking about crafting those adversarial examples for cybersecurity? You can't just randomly tweak the input, right? You've got to make sure it still works the way it's supposed to.
Right, a broken key isn't going to open any doors.
Exactly.
Right.
So Solaro's system incorporates constraints during the perturbation process. These constraints act as guidelines, ensuring that the adversarial examples actually keep their malicious functionality even after they've been changed.
Okay, so it's like a sculptor working within certain boundaries to create their art. They can be creative, but they can't just ignore the limitations of their materials.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And to make the system even more effective, Solaro introduces the concept of a substitute model. We talked about that a little bit earlier, remember?
The sparring partner, right?
Exactly. In Solara's system, the substitute model is trained to mimic the behavior of the actual target IDS. So this allows the attacker to generate adversarial examples without having to interact directly with the real system. It greatly reduces the risk of detection.
Oh, so they can, like, practice their moves in a safe environment before they go for the real thing.
Exactly. And this approach is really valuable in those black box scenarios where the attacker doesn't know much about the target system. They can use that substitute model to probe for weaknesses and refine their attacks before launching them for real.
That's pretty sneaky. And pretty ingenious, too. So, how effective is this new system? Did Solaro test it out?
He did. He tested the system on the CICICAT's 2017 dataset. It's a real-world dataset with a variety of network traffic, including malicious activity. And the results were pretty concerning. The system was able to generate adversarial examples that successfully got past the target IDS.
So even with all these defenses we've been talking about, this new system is still able to find a way in.
Yeah. And that's the thing about cybersecurity. It's this constant arms race. As soon as defenders develop a new defense, attackers start looking for ways to bypass it. Solaro's work shows us that this battle is far from over, and we need to keep pushing forward with new ideas.
It's a little bit unsettling, but also exciting in a way. So where do we go from here? What are some of the key takeaways from all this? And what does the future hold for this whole battle between AML and cybersecurity? We'll explore those questions and wrap up this deep dive in part 3.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. It's been a wild ride learning about adversarial machine learning and how it's changing the cybersecurity landscape.
Yeah, it really is fascinating stuff. So in part 2, we talked about Giuliano Solaro's research and how he actually built a system that can create these adversarial examples that can slip past even the best intrusion detection systems. It's a little scary to think about.
It is. I mean, it really shows just how much potential AML has to disrupt the way we think about security.
Absolutely. So where do we go from here? What are the big takeaways from this whole deep dive? And what's next in this battle between AML and cybersecurity?
Well, I think the biggest lesson here is that the old ways of doing cybersecurity just aren't enough anymore. Those signature-based systems that rely on spotting known attack patterns, they're becoming obsolete because attackers are using AML to create attacks that are completely new and unexpected.
Right, so the signature-based systems are kind of like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the needle keeps changing shape.
Exactly. And that's why we need to shift gears. We need to move towards more dynamic and adaptable approaches. And that's where machine learning itself can actually be a powerful tool for defense.
Okay, so wait, the same technology that attackers are using to create these adversarial examples can also be used to stop them.
You got it. We've already talked about adversarial training, where you expose your systems to adversarial examples so they learn to recognize and resist them. But we can go even further. We can develop new anomaly detection systems that are much less susceptible to AML attacks. Systems that focus on those subtle deviations from normal behavior, even if they don't match any known attack patterns.
So it's kind of like having a security guard who can think on their feet instead of just blindly following a set of rules.
That's a great way to put it. It's about building systems that are more flexible and can adapt to the ever-changing threat landscape.
That makes a lot of sense. So machine learning is both the problem and the solution here. It all depends on how we use it.
Exactly. That's the key takeaway, I think. As AI becomes more and more powerful, we need to be very careful about how we develop and deploy it, because it can be used for good or for bad.
It's a double-edged sword for sure. Well, this deep dive has been absolutely fascinating. We've learned about the sneaky nature of AML attacks, the challenges of defending against them, and the amazing work being done to develop new and innovative solutions.
It's a constantly evolving field, and there's still so much we don't know. But one thing is for sure, AML is a game changer, and it's going to have a huge impact on the future of cybersecurity.
Absolutely. So for our listeners out there, what's the most important thing they can take away from all of this? What can they do to protect themselves in this new world of AI-powered attacks and defenses?
Well, the first thing is to stay informed. Keep up with the latest developments in cybersecurity and be aware of the threats out there. And of course, practice good cybersecurity hygiene, strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, regular software updates. All that stuff is still crucial.
Right, the basics are still important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think it's also important to stay curious and question everything.
Mm.
Don't blindly trust any technology or system. Think critically about the information you're consuming. And always be on the lookout for new ways to protect yourself.
Great advice. So it's all about staying vigilant, staying informed, and never stopping learning.
Exactly. Because the best defense against these emerging threats is knowledge.
Well said. This has been an incredible journey into the world of adversarial machine learning. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found this deep dive informative and engaging. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we understand these evolving threats, the better equipped we'll be to stay safe in this increasingly digital world. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.